Here on AM Agenda, we're joined by the Resources Minister and the Minister for Northern Australia, Josh Frydenberg, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Shadow Treasurer, Ed Husic. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both. Let's I'll start with Josh Frydenberg and, criticism of the government's plans on a couple of fronts, on superannuation and on company tax cuts. This comes from the Financial Review today. Malcolm Broomhead, also former Deputy Prime Minister Mark Vaile, critical of these two key elements of your economic policy, Josh Frydenberg. What's your reaction to that?
Well, firstly on superannuation, as Matthias Cormann just outlined, the whole rationale for our changes is to go back to the original purpose of super, which is to be a substitute or a supplement to the age pension, and that came out of David Murray's Financial System Inquiry, which was the first such inquiry, Kieran, for nearly 2 decades since the Wallace Inquiry. When it comes to company tax cuts, the whole economy will benefit, and particularly small businesses. There's more than 2 million of them, employing more than 4 million people across the country. And you've heard from leading economists like Warwick McGibbon, who said that that could produce a $160 billion benefit to the economy. And you've heard from Chris Richardson saying that this is money well spent. And the point about our company tax rate at 30 cents in the dollar is that when it was put in for the first time in 2001, it was the 10th lowest in the 34-nation OECD grouping. Then today, because a whole lot of other countries have reduced their company tax rates, our company tax rate is the 6th highest. And this means
the question is, will they
ever
be delivered? That's the question that's being asked by Malcolm Broomhead this morning, BHP Director, ASIANO Chairman. He's saying, will they ever be delivered? Because it's a 10-year time frame. They're sceptical about it.
Well, it's absolutely being delivered. As you know, we're going to move as quickly as possible from 28.5% down to 27.5% for small businesses, and we'll scale up the businesses that will be eligible for this tax cut down to 25% over the next 10 years. That's an important change, and it's one that the budget can sustain, but importantly, it's going to create jobs across the economy. Now, the Labor Party, in their class warfare rhetoric, talks about billion-dollar companies. Well, I don't call a small business that employs 4 or 5 people at a cafe or a clothes shop as being a billion-dollar company. They're the ones that will benefit from the government's company tax cuts. They're the ones that will be able to employ more people, expand their business, and this has been endorsed by a number of very high-profile economists.
Ed Husic, is there a risk that the opposition has set your bar too low here? A $2 million turnover. You're going to miss a lot of small businesses with that, aren't you?
Oh, this is simply a way in which the coalition is trying to redefine a big business into a small business to give them a tax cut. It's like suggesting BHP is a landscaping company. It's just a sneaky way in which they're trying to deliver that tax cut. And I guess I'd want to make a number of points very quickly in relation to this. We offered last year to work with the government on this issue. They rejected it and played politics with it. Then at the last minute, in an election budget, they announced this cut. They don't provide the costings. They try to avoid releasing the costings. The PM says he doesn't know what the figures are when Treasury's been modelling it. We find out by the end of the week, budget week, that they do have the figures, and it's all designed as a political tactic to not actually let us know how much money is there. And the bottom line is this: elections are about choices. We're saying, for example, that we will fully fund Gonski and make sure that our economy's got the skills it needs into the future. The government wants to stump up a $50 billion tax cut to some of the biggest businesses in the country and deny us a longer-term prosperous future by making sure the economy's skilled.
When you say longer term, and I'll get Josh Frydenberg, you can reply to a bit of that in a moment, but this is really long term. We're talking about yesterday, the Shadow Treasurer, a GDP boost of 2.8%, and this is what the OECD has identified. But as it turns out, subsequently, that forecast was not until 2095.
And then they go back.
That's really long term.
And then they go back year on year and discount by roughly 3%. The gains to make it comparable and show what the benefit of that will be over a period of time, taking into account life expectancy as well. The bottom line is you cannot have a credible plan for jobs and growth if you are not planning to to have the skills there to drive that jobs and growth, and that's what we're trying to do through our education plans.
Josh Frydenberg, your reaction to that, your thoughts on that? Because obviously there's the argument about, like the government says, you don't need necessarily more money, it's about standards, but more money would always help, surely, in terms of education.
Well, of course, history shows us that standards and literacy and numeracy and smaller class sizes and better teacher quality, they're the factors that can really drive changes in the quality of education outcomes. But Chris Bowen's statement yesterday to the National Press Club, which you referred to, Kieran, was a real joke. Because firstly, Labor has started to call for 10-year costings and 10-year forecasts. Now they're putting forward 80-year costings and 80-year forecast with their education proposal. And then yesterday we hear from Chris Bowen that he wants to announce an economic statement in 100 days' time. That is, his only economic plan we'll hear about after the election, because he has no economic plan, and Chris Bowen will need more than a shave to give himself economic credibility. The Labor Party talks about AAA credit ratings and want to preserve it. Well, it was the Labor Party that lost our AAA credit rating, was the Labor Party that ran up all this debt that is creating the challenge for us today. In fact, it was the Howard Costello government in 2002 that got the AAA credit rating back from Moody's, and in 2003 they got the AAA credit rating back from Standard & Poor's. So with the Labor Party, you just don't have to listen to what they say, you have to actually look at what they do, and their track record is simply appalling.
The issue about education funding,
should there be more detail in terms of costings for all of your commitments and not simply a commitment to an economic statement after the election if you win it?
Well, two things. Both Chris Bowen and Tony Burke have committed to release our policies and costings, or the costings to those policies ahead of the election. We'll also have PFO as well, and we also said that we would bring forward MyEFO to the first 100 days, or within the first 3 months, because frankly we need to have be able to show to people that where the economy's at. To be able to test the very heroic assumptions that are being contained in this budget around growth and things like, for example, the iron ore price that has effectively delivered $16 billion in extra revenue based on an assumption. And so we need to have that certainty. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on is Josh's claim about the 80 years. The 80 years that has been forecast by none other than the OECD, who reckon that we need to be able to make these type of investments into skills, backed up by the type of comments by now RBA or soon-to-be RBA Governor Phil Lowe, who says that if we do want to have a prosperous future, we've got the fundamentals. We need to be able to build on that through an investment in human capital. And whenever you hear a coalition government MP or minister talk about education, they always refer to it as a cost, not an investment. And from our perspective, we do need to invest in skills into the future. We need to break down disadvantage in some parts of the country through targeted investment in building those skills.
Let's look at the issue of the Greens and their impact on this campaign. A couple of things. First of all, to you, Josh Frydenberg, are you as keen to see the Liberals preference the Greens in Batman, for example? I know that in Kooyong, the Greens registered a 16% vote in your own seat, and in Prahran, the neighbouring seat at the state level, they won that particular seat, the Greens. Are you as keen to see the Liberals get into bed with the Greens as say, Mr Kroger is?
Well, Kieran, issues of preferences are ones for the organisational wing and specifically the Federal Campaign Director, Tony Nutt. But the Prime Minister couldn't have been more unequivocal yesterday when he said there's absolutely no chance that we would ever collaborate with the Greens. And you can trust us on that because that is our track record. Whereas the Labor Party, just a few years ago, had a formal agreement with the Greens to try to hold on to government. Now, we know that's what will happen again if we get a hung parliament. So it doesn't matter how much slipping and sliding Bill Shorten and Chris Bowen and Tony Burke do on this issue. The truth is these two parties are soulmates. They do fight it out in particular seats, but in terms of their broad policy parameters, they are soulmates, and they will get together in a hung parliament, and that will be more chaos and dysfunction for the Australian people, the type of chaos and dysfunction that they rejected emphatically at the 2013 election. We will not do that.
Before I get Ed Husick's response, just tell me though, do you think the Liberals should be preferencing the Greens in any seat, including the seat of Batman, which was the suggestion yesterday? Do you think that that is a good or bad idea?
And listen in.
Kieran, that is an issue for Tony Nutt and the strategy that they employ. Well, that's the reality.
Good flick pass.
Yeah, well, it was a good flick pass to you now, Ed Husick, because the thing is, if you're in minority government, you would have to have the support of the Greens to govern if you do get to that point. Obviously, we're throwing ahead 53 days now, but that is a prospect given where the polls are right now.
Look, you heard Bill yesterday. I mean, he nailed it in his comment. Tell them they're dreaming. I mean, that's just not going to happen. We've ruled it out, and more importantly, we're in it to win it. What we're looking to do is put forward a series of positive policies, over 100 positive policies that we think can deliver better schools, better hospitals, better jobs. So we are out there with that message. The thing that needs to be taken into account is, despite the very fancy footwork by my friend Josh Frydenberg a few moments ago, it is the biggest, worst-kept secret that the Victorian Liberal Party is actively looking to preference the Greens or facilitate any way in which they can help the Greens in contests in Victorian seats and threaten I believe people who provide a massive contribution to the parliament, people like David Feeney. They are doing this deliberately. So any suggestion that this is something that's flicked off to Tony Nutt is just, I think it doesn't pass the believable test when we know that, Michael Kroger in Victoria is actively working on this proposition.
Yeah, but let's focus on Labor, because if you did get to a point where you had more seats than the Liberal Party, but not enough to govern in your own right, this would be a situation where you'd have a confidence vote. The Greens, whether it's a formal alliance or not, you'd have to negotiate with them, even if it's on a legislation by legislation basis. That would be a level of cooperation. Mr. Shorten saying, tell them they're dreaming. I mean, it's obviously, quoting Mr. Kerrigan and the jousting sticks, but this is about governing, and if you've got the chance to do it, he'll take it, won't he?
No, we've been clear. We're in it to win it, and we're not interested in going back to what we've experienced back in 2010.
Kieran,
this front page of the Daily Telegraph. Josh, I'll get back to you in a second. I just want to get quickly Ed Husick's thoughts. This front page of the Daily Telegraph endorsing a vote for Albanese. Sarah Hanson-Young says it's not going to hurt because the Greens basically are not going to be reading the telly anyway. What's your reaction to that strong show of support for Anthony Albanese?
I'm Ed Husick and I endorse that front page of the Daily Telegraph.
Josh, your thoughts on that? And sorry to interrupt you. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Ed will go on and say they're in it to win it, no doubt about that. But in the event that they don't win it outright, that is what they're going to be trying to do. Get into bed with the Greens. Now, the point about Bill Shorten is he was a key lieutenant in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. So he was part of a government, a senior member of a government that did this deal with the Greens. So it won't be any different if Bill Shorten is there in a hung parliament, whereas we are going to govern in our own right. And we would reject any collaboration, as the Prime Minister unequivocally did the other day, with the Greens, because they're an anathema to our values, whereas for the Labor Party,
wouldn't have you anyway, would they?
Let's put that test, what you just said then, Josh, when we see what the preference deals are like in Victoria, and the whole quote about it being an anathema, we'll test out. We'll let experience test out the claim.
Gentlemen, got to take a break. Back in just a moment with Ed Husick and Josh Frydenberg. Stay with us.